Today's reading is from John chapter 9, verses 1 to 7. As Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus. "But this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said this, he spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Let's pray. Loving God, we ask that you would speak to us today. May we hear your voice and see the presence of your light. Amen. In the summer of 1983, just a few days before the birth of his first son, writer and theologian John Hull went completely blind. In this time of enormous upheaval, he began to keep a record of his thoughts, his feelings, his imagination and his memories. And he kept them on cassette tape. And making cassette tape after cassette tape, he tried to come to terms with the darkness he began to experience more and more in his life. A few years ago, those tapes were taken and used to turn into a film called Notes on Blindness. Let's begin by watching the trailer of that film.
This is cassette 1, track 1, Notes on Blindness.
July the 5th, 1984.
What happens to the brain when optic stimulation ceases?
I am concerned to understand blindness. The pictures in the gallery of my mind have dimmed somewhat, so I could no longer remember easily what my wife looked like, or what my daughter Imogen looked like.
I began to be terribly afraid that I would lose you.
Everything was drifting away. How could this happen to me? Who had the right to deprive me of the sight of my children at Christmas time? That there's been a strange kind of change in the state of my brain. There is something so totally purging about blindness that one either is destroyed or renewed. I think I am beginning to understand what it's like to be blind.
wonder if you caught what he said there at the end. He said, I think I'm beginning to understand what it is to be blind. I think I'm beginning to understand what it is to be blind. When I watched the film, it's powerful because we see the person, John, we see this man. But as I watched the film, I just began to realise just how little I understood anything about what it would be like to be blind. And I started to realise, do you know what, heck, I haven't begun to even understand what it is to be able to see. And then Mark gave me John chapter 9 on sight and blindness to speak on. And that's what this chapter is about in John's Gospel. It is all about seeing and blindness. And it's a long chapter. There's 41 verses, and 24 of them explicitly mention that theme. And in it, we meet a man who is blind. And we see what happens to him. Of course, we can't look at all of the story. There's 7 scenes in the chapter. And as a whole, what happens in the story is we see that we see someone who has sat in darkness encounter the light for the first time. But at the same time, what we see is those who think they can see, blinding themselves to the light and plunging themselves into darkness. And it is a rich and beautiful chapter. And there's 7 scenes of interaction between different characters. And in the first 7 verses that Debbie read for us, we just get scenes 1 and 2. And in scenes 1 or 2, we get the bit that we are most interested in, the bit I'm going to focus on, which is the sign that Jesus performs. Because that's what we're doing in this series here at St. James's. I hope you've been following it. We've been looking at the 7 signs in John's Gospel. There was Jesus turning water into wine at Cana. There were 2 healings. There was Jesus feeding the 5,000. Jesus walking on water. There's this one, and next week, the last one, Jesus raising Lazarus. And Ruth will speak on that next week. And Sam explained it for us a fortnight ago really well, that these aren't to be read as one-off events. They're not to be read as miracle stories, so much as they're to be read as signs that point us to who Jesus is. And what we see in this chapter, as we look at Jesus, is that Jesus changes the way we see. Jesus changes the way we see. The story starts with Jesus seeing. He sees a man who was born blind. That can also be translated, a man who was blind from his mother's womb. The disciples, it seems, don't really see the man based on the question they ask. They say, Rabbi, who was it who sinned that this man was born blind? This man or his parents? And Jesus is not impressed. Jesus is not amused by this question. It reveals the attitudes of many of the day towards those with disabilities. But it also shows that the disciples did not see this man. They did not see him. And Jesus rejects their thinking straight out. He says, neither this man sinned, nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God might be revealed in him or in his life. The works of God might be revealed in him. You see, this is not about sin. This is not about blame. This is not about cause. It is about this moment. It's about this encounter. And it is about how the works of God are to be revealed in him. It's not something done to him, not something done for him. It's going to be done in him. And Jesus changes the way we see. Jesus then goes on to say that he does these works while it is still day, because night is coming when nobody can work. But while he is in the world, he is, I am the light of the world. And it's always the case in John's Gospel. You've got to read it as a whole. But in this repetition of key phrases and ideas, John, the Gospel writer, makes it clear that we're meant to understand what is happening in chapter 9 along with the rest of the Gospel. It links in, okay? There's loads and loads of points of contact with the wider story. And of course, the light of the world is that repeating idea in John. But what we're seeing is that Jesus, as the light of the world, is going to shed light on this man's situation. And the man's situation, only a part of it is that he can't see. There's a heck of a lot more that is going on. So what does Jesus do? He, after he says this, he spits on the ground, he makes mud and puts it on the man's eyes. He spits into the dust. Now, only the chapter before, chapter 8, if you remember, it begins with a story of a person who is being judged by others about sin. And what happens there is that Jesus, not for the first time or the last time in the gospel, he stoops down to the ground and engages with the dust. Of course, in chapter 8, it's the woman caught in adultery. And Jesus, he drops to the ground and he writes in the dust. Now, here in chapter 9, Jesus encounters someone who is being judged by others because of sin. And now he spits in the dust. It begins in the dust. And I can't hear these stories of that woman and this man without calling to mind the words from Psalm 103, words that are read at every Church of England funeral. As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. For he knows how we are formed. He remembers that we are but dust. He remembers that we are dust. Today, having already thought about being a father, I'm blessed to be a father to two small children. I have a little boy and a little girl, and they're full of life. And my little girl, she doesn't see very well. And it's not just that she needs glasses, she's actually partially sighted. And as a parent, you're watching this journey as she continues to be formed. And as parents, we're becoming more aware as she communicates well more and her world gets bigger, just what her sight means. And what we've come to realise is that she's flipping determined and nothing's going to hold her back. But in reality, that there comes a distance at which she can't see anything. There comes a distance at which she can't see anything. And I've been thinking about that. And in a sense, is that not true for all of us? There comes a distance at which we can't see anything. In a way, we are all partially sighted. And do you know what? If I think about it, if I'm really honest, thinking about more than physical sight, I spend a lot of my life being willfully partially sighted. I don't know about you, but I just think about all the things that I do not see, all the things that I cannot see, and all the things that I quite simply will not see. I know that I have turned more blind eyes in my life than I've turned other cheeks. And I turn those blind eyes to a hurting world. I turn them outwardly, I turn them upwardly, I turn them downwardly, and I turn them inwardly. And I need to do some thinking about how I've been formed, sure, and what causes me not to see. But I want to do that praying to Jesus, who changes the way we see. Now, the disciples in this story, they have got a distance problem. They see the man who was born blind, and they can only see that he can be an individual and responsible for himself, or he is the product of his parents. That's the limit of their sight for him. And the irony is that the one with the greatest vision for humanity is spitting distance away. And what he shows is phenomenal. You know, we have this expression, don't we? I probably thought this more often than it's appropriate, but we have this expression that says, you know, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. Yeah? You can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. There's something in this story where it seems to be that Jesus is saying, do you know what? You can choose your family. The scriptures tell us that our beginnings don't begin at birth. Our beginnings don't begin in the womb. Our beginnings don't begin in conception. Our beginnings begin with the one who handles the dust and the mud. And what that means is that whoever we are, whoever others tell us to be, who we really are, can be seen only at that distance, beyond our horizon. Who we really are is who we are in God. We are the people who in Jesus, and this is in John 1, which is like a contents page for the whole of John's Gospel, we are those who are given the right to be children who are born of God. Children not born of natural descent or a husband's will, but born of God. And when we say we can choose our family, it's not that we are unchoosing the people around us. You know, this is Father's Day, and I don't know the story of your life, and I don't know whether your father is someone who is known or unknown, who is beloved or estranged, whether your memories are for good or ill, or for joy or for sorrow. And it's not that we unchoose, but in Jesus, we push the distance. And we choose to see ourselves as those born of God. We choose to see a bigger family. And Jesus changes the way we see. But we've just left that man not seeing that at the moment, okay? We've just left him with mud on his eyes, so we probably need to go back into the story and pick it up. So here's our man who was born blind. And Jesus has spat on the ground and put mud on his eyes, which isn't usually a socially acceptable thing to do, just if you were thinking about emulating that this week. And then what happens next is he tells him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And this is kind of important because all this is happening, of course, in Jerusalem. And Jesus has been in Jerusalem a while. And he's been in Jerusalem during a massive festival, the Feast of the Tabernacles. And where everyone's been camping out in tents and remembering what it was like to be the people of God in a desert. And now the thing that happens in that festival, and this is a major deal, is that every day of the festival, a golden jug was taken to the pool of Siloam, and the water was taken out, and it was ceremonially poured out in front of the people. And you might remember that story, that on the greatest day of the feast, when all this was happening, the priest would have been pouring out water from the pool of Siloam on the stage. Jesus stands up in the middle of the crowd and he says, if anyone is thirsty, let them come to me and drink. It's a great moment. It's worth reading. But the thing is, this man born blind has never seen the water from the pool of Siloam. He's been in Jerusalem. He's been there for the festival. But it's all been happening up there. It's been out of sight. It's been out of reach. It's been out of touch. The well-meaning religion of the day in some way excludes him. But now the Jesus who welcomed people to come to him is speaking to him and telling him to go to the pool of Siloam. And so he goes. And what a moment this would be. You know, this guy, as the waters break upon his entry, as he washes this water, not only does he see it, it is the first thing that he sees. In Jesus, the symbols of the old religion come to life in a whole new way. This is a new birth, a new beginning. And it's remarkable, and it's marvelous, and he comes home seeing. And the thing is, Jesus could have sent him to a different pool. He could have sent him to the pool of Bethesda. That's in Jerusalem too. And Bethesda means house of mercy. But he doesn't send him there. He sends him to the pool of Siloam, which means sent. And here's the thing. This stuff that's happening, this is not an act of mercy. This is an act of commissioning. This is not pity. This is power, and this is purpose. And now this man is sent. And what God has done through Jesus in him starts bubbling up. It's that work of the Spirit promised in chapter 7, actually. And it starts bubbling up, and it starts coming out, and he becomes unrecognizable. Literally, if you read the story, unrecognizable. And I love it if you track the story through. If you ask the man, you know, who Jesus is, you can see his growth as he changes. If you ask the man who Jesus is, in verse 11, Jesus is that man called Jesus. If you ask the man who Jesus is in verse 17, he is a prophet. If you ask the man who Jesus is in verse 27, he is someone who you might want to follow. If you ask the man who Jesus is in verse 33, he is from God. You ask the man who Jesus is in verse 37, he is the Lord who is to be worshipped. Wow. And all the man does through the rest of the chapter is he just tells it as he's experienced it. That's what it is to be a witness to Jesus. You don't have to know any clever formulas or fancy ideas. You just say what Jesus has done in you. That's it. That's the ball game. And it might not be the whole picture. It might not be an awful lot at this point, but that's okay. Because God's works keep being revealed in him, in us, in you, in me. And we just tell what Jesus has done for us. That's all we do. As Jesus keeps changing the way that we see. And I want Jesus to keep changing the way that I see. I don't want to miss what's happening in these signs. I want to look at them again and make sure that I don't miss out. I want to see it all. And as Jesus repairs that wedding at Cana, we might see the one who offers something better than marriage. As Jesus heals the sick, we might see the one who makes us whole. As Jesus provides a meal for thousands, we might see the one who can feed the world. As Jesus walks on the water, we might see the one who offers a peace that can build bridges across oceans. And as Jesus gives sight to this man, I pray that we might see the greatest vision for all of the human family. That in here we might know for ourselves and might know for others that we are born of God. I think I'm beginning to understand what it is to be blind. And I think I'm beginning to understand what it is to